The first thing I noticed wasn't the house, it was my son's hands. He was stacking firewood along the side of the garage when the taxi pulled up, and even from the street I could see how rough they'd become. Cracked at the knuckles, darkened in the creases, the kind of hands you get from years of work that was never meant to be yours. My son is an accountant, or he used to be. He had soft hands and a good laugh and a little office above a coffee shop in downtown Kelowna where he kept a photo of the two of us on his desk. I know because he'd sent me a picture of it years ago, back when he still sent pictures. I stood at the end of the driveway with my suitcase and watched him for a moment before he looked up. He was thinner than I remembered. Not sick thin, but worn thin. The kind of thin that happens when someone forgets to eat because they've forgotten they're allowed to rest. When he finally saw me, his face did something complicated, not joy, not surprise, something closer to fear, and then, very quickly, something that tried to look like a smile. "Mum," he said, "you should have called. I've been in Halifax for 11 years. 11 years running the kitchen supply business I built from nothing, the one my late husband and I had started in our garage in Kelowna back in 1987. When he passed, I kept it going because that's what you do. And when my son, my Marcus, told me he was getting married to a woman named Serena and that they were starting a life together, I thought, this is the moment. This is when I hand things over and finally breathe." I signed the house to Marcus, our family home on Lakeshore Road, the one with a wraparound porch and the view of Okanagan Lake that made people stop their cars. 4 bedrooms, nearly 3,000 square feet, and paid off completely. I'd made sure of that before I signed anything. I hired a notary. I sat across from Marcus at the kitchen table with a cup of tea going cold between us, and I said, "This house is your foundation. Don't let anyone take it from you." He'd laughed. He said, "Mum, no one's taking anything." That was 11 years ago. I'd come back unannounced because the last 3 times I'd called, no one answered. Not Marcus's cell, not the house line. I'd emailed. I'd messaged through his old Facebook account that he never really used anyway. My neighbor's daughter in Halifax, a sweet girl who follows everything online, told me she'd seen Serena posting photos of a kitchen renovation, new marble countertops, a wine fridge. I thought about those hands stacking firewood and I booked a flight. Serena opened the door before I made it up the porch steps. She was dressed well, Serena. She always dressed well. That was something I'd noticed at the wedding. She wore clothing the way some people wear armor. Everything pressed and deliberate. She looked at my suitcase, then at me, and her smile arrived about 2 seconds too late. "Vera," she said, "what a surprise. Marcus didn't mention you were coming." "Marcus didn't know," I said. Behind her, deeper in the house, I heard movement, a television, voices, and then from the kitchen, the sound of dishes being washed, the particular rhythm of someone doing chores alone. Serena stepped aside and I walked in. The house looked different, not bad exactly, but different in a way I couldn't quite name. The furniture my husband and I had collected over 30 years was gone. The sideboard where I kept my mother's china, the armchair by the window where he used to read. In their place were newer things, sleeker things, the kind you find in a showroom where everything matches and nothing has a history. The renovation my neighbor's daughter had seen wasn't a renovation. It was a replacement. In the kitchen, Marcus stood at the sink with his back to me. He was washing a pan that probably didn't need washing, scrubbing it with the focused attention of someone who needed an excuse not to look up. There was another woman at the kitchen table, Serena's mother, Claudine. She was perhaps 65, with reading glasses pushed up into her silver hair and a cup of tea in her hand, sitting at my kitchen table with the ease of someone who sits there every morning. "Vera," she said warmly, "what a nice surprise. We were just talking about needing a good dinner." Marcus turned then, and I saw it, a flicker of something real behind his eyes, quickly covered. "Mum, You look good. You look tired, I said. Serena moved past me to stand near the island. The new marble island, I noticed, and said lightly, Marcus has been busy. The yard needs a lot of work this time of year, and the cleaning service cancelled on us, so he's been picking up the slack. You know how it is. I looked at my son. He was nodding, agreeing. The way you agree when agreeing has become easier than the alternative. Where's your office? I asked him. The one above the coffee shop. The kitchen went quiet. Even the refrigerator seemed to hold its breath. I work from home now, Marcus said. Since when? Serena answered for him. Oh, it's been a couple of years. It made more sense given everything we had going on with the house. Given everything. I let that sit. I set my bag down by the door and looked around at the kitchen I'd designed, the window I'd chosen because it faced the lake, the drawer where I used to keep the good scissors, and Marcus always lost them as a boy. I'd like to speak with my son, I said. Claudine set her cup down with a small, careful click. Of course, she said. We'll give you two a moment. But she didn't leave. She moved to the living room and sat in the armchair that used to face my husband's, and she turned on the television at a volume just low enough that you couldn't quite forget she was there. Serena stayed in the kitchen. She refreshed her tea. She leaned against the counter and watched us with the relaxed attention of someone who had no reason to worry. Marcus looked at the floor. Mum, I'm fine. You're washing a clean pan, I said. He almost smiled. Almost. Serena likes the kitchen kept a certain way. This is your kitchen, I said. This is your house. I signed it to you, Marcus, not. Things change, Serena said from the counter. Her voice was pleasant, the way a closed door is pleasant. It keeps the cold out and the warmth in, but it doesn't let you through. Marcus and I are a partnership. What's his is mine, what's mine is his. That's what marriage is. I looked at her. Where does that leave the house? She smiled. Well, it's ours now. Both of ours. Marcus had it transferred into joint ownership 2 years after we married. It made sense financially. Equity planning. Mortgage flexibility. She waved a hand. His accountant actually suggested it. I turned to Marcus. Is that true? He didn't answer right away. His jaw worked like he was chewing on something he couldn't swallow. Marcus, I said quietly, look at me. He looked up, and there it was behind his eyes, the thing I'd been afraid of since I saw his hands. Not unhappiness, something worse. Resignation. It was the right thing at the time, he said. I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone. Not to call anyone. Not yet. But Marcus saw the movement, and his face changed in a way that I felt in my chest. A small, involuntary flinch, like a man bracing for a noise. I put the phone away. I'd like to see the transfer documents, I said. Serena set down her tea. Vera, we're family. You don't need to. I'd like to see them. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she went to the office. My old sewing room, I noticed, now outfitted with a desk and filing cabinet, and came back with a manila envelope that she dropped on the kitchen island like she was setting down a winning hand. I opened it. The transfer was there, Marcus's signature at the bottom of a page that moved his sole ownership of the property into a joint tenancy with Serena. The date was 9 years ago, 3 years into their marriage. I studied his signature. I knew my son's handwriting the way you know your own face. He'd always written his name in a forward lean, confident and quick. This signature was cramped. The letters pressed down too hard, like a man writing under observation. I also noticed the date was in October. I remembered October 9 years ago because I had called Marcus to wish him a happy birthday, and he'd sounded strange, distracted. And when I asked if everything was okay, he'd said he'd been dealing with some stuff at work. I closed the folder. I'm going to need a few days, I said. Serena blinked. To do what? To visit, I said simply. I haven't been home in 2 years. I'd like to spend time with my son. She had no good reason to refuse that, so she didn't. I set my suitcase in the guest room. My old sewing room had been repurposed. The actual guest room was now Claudine's room, I was informed, because she had a bad knee and the stairs were easier for her on that side of the house. So I was in the smallest bedroom, the one Marcus had used as a teenager, still with the same closet door that didn't quite shut. That night I lay awake listening to the house. You can learn a lot about a household from its sounds at night. Who moves freely, who moves quietly, whose footsteps are confident and whose are careful. Marcus moved carefully. In the morning, I found him in the backyard before anyone else was awake, splitting logs. He didn't need to be splitting logs. There was a gas fireplace in the living room and a cord of wood already stacked by the garage. He was splitting logs because he needed somewhere to put his body while his mind ran in circles. I brought him coffee and sat on the back step and waited. It took about 10 minutes. "I know you're worried," he said, not looking up from the wood. "Tell me about the transfer," I said. He set down the axe, stood there for a moment looking at the lake, the same lake we used to fish on when he was small, the same water his father had proposed to me beside. "She said it was for tax purposes," he said. "Her father's an accountant. He put together a plan, said if anything happened to me she'd have full rights without probate. Said it was the responsible thing to do as a married man." "And you believed him?" "I believed her." He picked up the axe again, then put it down. "At the beginning she was different. Or I was different. I don't know anymore." He sat on the chopping block and looked at his hands. "She handles all the finances now. I put my paychecks into the joint account and she manages the bills. What's left over?" He looked at me with something that might have been shame. "She says we're building equity, that I spend too frivolously." "Marcus," I said carefully, "when did you last buy yourself something?" He thought about it, genuinely thought about it, like the answer required excavation. "I got new work boots last spring," he said. "She said I needed them for the yard." I set my coffee cup on the step and looked at my son, 41 years old, sitting on a chopping block in the backyard of a house he used to own, trying to remember the last time he spent money on himself. "Where's your business?" I asked. "The practice, your clients." His throat moved. "I closed it 3 years ago." "Why?" Serena said the overhead wasn't worth it. She had a spreadsheet. A hollow sound that might have been a laugh. "She always has a spreadsheet. She said it made more sense for me to work as a contractor, bring in freelance clients. That way there's no lease, no liability. And she needed someone home more with the house and everything." "And is there contractor work?" Long pause. "Some." "Marcus." I kept my voice level. "Are you the one maintaining this house?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. I went back inside. Claudine was at the kitchen table again. Same chair, same cup, like she'd been there all night. Serena was somewhere upstairs. I could hear her moving, the sound of a blow-dryer. I went to the office. I needed a few minutes alone with the filing cabinet. The drawer opened easily. I found what I was looking for in the back, a folder labeled House Renovation 2021. Inside were receipts. A lot of receipts. New kitchen, $47,000. Bathroom upstairs, $23,000. Landscaping, $18,500. The wine fridge alone had cost $6,200. There were also bank statements, joint account statements. I looked at the income column. Marcus's freelance deposits, modest, irregular. I looked at the outgoing column. Regular transfers, large ones, to an account listed only by number. I took photos of everything on my phone. Then I went to sit with my son. I didn't say anything yet. I just brought him another coffee and sat with him while the morning came in, off the lake, cold and clean and very quiet, the way October mornings in the Okanagan have always been. He seemed to relax a little, just having someone sit with him without wanting anything. That afternoon I called my lawyer from the car, parked 2 blocks from the house. His name was Robert, and he'd handled my husband's estate and the original deed transfer to Marcus. He was the kind of lawyer who answered his own phone, which I'd always appreciated. "Vera," he said when I explained, "tell me everything." I told him the joint tenancy transfer, the closed business, the bank statements, the renovation receipts, the way my son moved through his own house like a man navigating a minefield he'd learned to map by feel. Robert was quiet for a moment. "Do you remember the protective clause we discussed when you transferred the property?" I did. At the time Marcus had waved it off, embarrassed, but Robert had insisted and I had trusted Robert. "It's still registered," he said. "If the original transfer to Marcus was in any way leveraged, or if subsequent transfers were made under undue influence, we have grounds to challenge the joint tenancy designation." "What do we need?" "Evidence of financial coercion, anything that suggests the transfer of ownership was not made freely and with full understanding." "I have bank statements," I said, "and I have a son who closed a profitable practice because his wife gave him a spreadsheet." Robert was quiet again. "I'll drive up," he said. "Give me 2 days." I went back to the house. I made dinner that night the way I used to, roast chicken with rosemary and the kind of potatoes Marcus had loved since he was 7. Serena ate it without comment. Claudine said it was lovely. Marcus ate 2 helpings, and I saw something cross his face that I hadn't seen since I'd arrived, something young and unguarded, just for a moment. After dinner, when Serena and Claudine had moved to the living room, Marcus stayed to help me with the dishes. We stood at the sink together the way we used to when he was a teenager, and he talked. Quietly, carefully at first, and then more, the way water finds its level once you've opened a channel. He told me Serena had been managing everything since year 2 of the marriage. Not because he'd asked her to, but because it had happened gradually, one handed over task at a time, until he'd looked up one day and couldn't find the thread that led back to his own life. He told me that when he brought up the business closure, there had been an argument that lasted 3 days, and at the end of it he'd signed the papers to close because it had felt like the only way to make the noise stop. He told me that his name was on the joint account, but the debit card for that account was in Serena's wallet. He told me that he'd wanted to call me many times, but Serena had said I was difficult and that I'd never really approved of her. And eventually he'd started to believe it, because when you hear something often enough in a closed space, it starts to sound like the truth. "I don't know when it happened," he said quietly, looking at the lake through the window his father had chosen. "I used to know what I wanted. I used to have opinions about things." "You still do," I said. "They're just buried." Robert arrived on a Thursday in a sensible sedan with his briefcase and his silver hair and the specific kind of stillness that very good lawyers carry, the kind that tells you they've seen worse and they have a plan. Serena answered the door. Her face did the same thing it had done when she saw me, the smile arriving 2 beats late. "This is my lawyer," I said. "He's here to review some property documents. Is there somewhere we can sit?" "This isn't." She stopped herself. "Of course," she said. "The living room." We sat across from each other, the manila envelope on the coffee table between us like a line in the sand. Claudine had retreated to her room. Marcus stood near the window, hands in his pockets. Robert laid out the documents with the methodical care of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. He explained, calmly and without accusation, that the original deed contained registered protective conditions, that any subsequent transfer of the property could be subject to review if evidence of undue influence was present. Serena's composure was impressive. I'll give her that. "Undue influence," she repeated. "Marcus transferred the property because we are married and he wanted to. That's not undue influence. That's a choice." "Can you tell me about the account where the renovation funds were allocated?" Robert asked. He slid a copy of the bank statement across the table. The one showing the transfer of $68,000 to the account, listed only by number. Something moved behind Serena's eyes, small and fast, like a fish beneath still water. "That's a personal investment account," she said. "In whose name?" She didn't answer. "The account," Robert said, "is registered solely to Serena Whitfield Park. Not a joint account, not a household account, her name only." Marcus turned from the window. "What?" "The renovation funds," I said, looking at my son. "The kitchen, the bathrooms, the landscaping, $68,000 moved through the joint account and transferred to an account your wife holds alone. That's my money." His voice was very quiet. "My freelance income, the equity line we opened." "An equity line on a property now held in joint tenancy," Robert said, "meaning the debt is attached to both names, but the funds were moved to a sole account." Serena stood. "I want my own lawyer present." "Of course," Robert said pleasantly. "In the meantime, I filed a notice with the BC Land Title Office to flag any further transfers or encumbrances on the property at Lakeshore Road. Pending our review, nothing can be sold or refinanced without notification." She stared at him. The composure was still there, but it was working very hard now. "I looked at my daughter-in-law, this woman who had worn my son down like water over stone until he couldn't remember what he'd been before she'd started. I thought about what to say. I thought about his hands stacking firewood. I thought about the clean pan. 'I want to ask you something,' I said, 'and I want you to think before you answer.' She said nothing. When did you decide that this was acceptable? Was there a moment you chose it, or did it just become habit?" The room was very still. Outside, the lake caught the afternoon light and turned it gold. Serena sat back down. Slowly, she looked at the table, then at Robert, then at something no one else in the room could see. "I was trying to protect us," she said finally. Her voice had changed. The pleasantness was gone, and what was underneath it was smaller and less certain. "My mother has nothing. She gave everything to my father, and he left and she had nothing. I wasn't going to let that happen to me. So you took from my son instead," I said. "I built a life," she said. "I built a stable life." "You built it with someone else's foundation," I said, "and you told him it was his idea." Marcus had not moved from the window. He was looking at his wife with an expression I recognized from when he was 8 years old and had discovered that the friend he trusted had been taking his lunch. Not rage, something quieter and more lasting. Understanding. A week later, Serena's personal lawyer met with Robert. The process was neither fast nor simple. These things never are. But the evidence was clear. The renovation funds, the sole account, the systematic removal of Marcus from the financial decisions of his own household, while his name remained on every debt. Robert called it financial abuse, methodically documented. Claudine moved out first, quietly, into a suite in West Kelowna that Serena had apparently secured some time ago. "I've always thought that told you something, that the exit route was already mapped." Serena contested the protective clause. She hired a good lawyer, and the good lawyer argued that Marcus had signed freely. Marcus sat across from that lawyer and said evenly, "I signed because I was told it was the responsible thing to do as a married man, and I didn't understand what I was signing, and I asked twice to have it explained, and both times I was told I was overthinking it." There was a mediation. There was a financial disclosure order. The sole account turned out to contain $94,000, pulled from the joint account over 8 years in transfers, small enough to avoid automatic flagging. 8 years, the length of a slow tide. The joint tenancy was dissolved. The property reverted to Marcus's sole ownership. Serena received a share of the equity she genuinely contributed, calculated by an independent assessor. It was less than she'd planned for. I stayed in Kelowna. I didn't plan to, but after I walked through that house the first evening, really walked through it, opening drawers, looking at what had been replaced and what had been kept. I found on the shelf in Marcus's old closet the photo from his office, the one from above the coffee shop, the two of us at his university graduation, him in the gown, me gripping his arm and grinning like a fool. He'd kept it. He'd kept it through all of it. Marcus started freelancing again on his own terms this time. He found office space above a different coffee shop, smaller, and he put the photo on the desk again. He called me when he landed his first long-term client, his voice lighter than it had been since I arrived. I was in my kitchen making tea and I stood at the window looking at the lake and felt something loosen in my chest that I hadn't realized had been held tight for years. He still splits firewood sometimes. I think it's become a way of thinking for him, a kind of moving meditation. But now when he does it, he doesn't have the look of a man with nowhere to put what he's carrying. He looks like himself. Quieter than before, maybe. More deliberate. But himself. Some evenings we sit on the back porch with coffee, watching the light change on the water. He talks about the clients he's rebuilding, the practice he wants to grow again, a cottage he's looked at outside of Penticton. He asks my opinion. I give it, and he disagrees sometimes, and we argue pleasantly about it the way people do when they're not afraid of each other's voices. The house on Lakeshore Road still has the wraparound porch. The renovated kitchen, I'll admit, is beautiful, even if it was bought with money that wasn't hers to spend. Marcus is paying off the equity line slowly and steadily, the way he does everything. His hands are still rough. Some things take time to soften. But he looked up at me one morning last week while he was making coffee, and without any particular reason, just the morning coming in off the lake, he said, "I'm glad you came back, Mum." I am too, and this time I'm not going anywhere. I keep thinking about that clean pan. Marcus was scrubbing it when I walked in, methodical, focused, like a man who'd learned to make himself useful so he'd have a reason to stay in his own kitchen. That image has stayed with me more than any of the legal documents, more than the bank statements or the transfer papers. A grown man in the house I gave him, finding ways to justify his presence in his own home. I don't think Serena woke up one morning and decided to dismantle my son. I think it happened the way most quiet damage happens, gradually through small concessions that each seemed reasonable on their own. He handed over the finances because she was organized. He closed the practice because the spreadsheet made sense. He stopped calling me because he'd been told often enough that I was difficult. Each step was half a step. And then one day he looked up and he was somewhere he didn't recognize, with hands that belonged to a laborer and a name on debts he hadn't chosen. What strikes me, looking back, is that the harm only became possible because my son stopped trusting his own judgment. Not all at once, that would have been too obvious even to him. But slowly, his sense of what he knew and what he deserved got handed over along with everything else. That's the part that took the longest to rebuild. Not the property, not the practice. The quiet certainty that his own read on a situation could be trusted. I think about integrity a lot these days. Not the word we put on motivational calendars, but the real thing. The kind that means you stay connected to what you actually believe, even when someone you love is telling you that you're wrong. Marcus had it once. He was a young man with opinions and a laugh and a photo on his desk. Serena didn't steal those things. She just created conditions where he set them down, one at a time, until they were out of reach. What brought him back wasn't me. I want to be clear about that. I showed up, yes, and I called Robert, and I sat on the back step with coffee and asked the right questions. But Marcus was the one who answered them honestly. He was the one who sat across from Serena's lawyer and said, plainly and without drama, what had happened to him. That took something, a kind of clear-eyed courage that doesn't make noise but doesn't flinch either. He'd had it all along. It had just been waiting under all that exhaustion for someone to give it room. The $94,000 in that account, the 8 years of quiet transfers, The renovations paid for with equity neither of them had earned a loan. None of it would have worked if Serena hadn't been, in her own way, intelligent about it. She understood systems. She understood how to make dependency look like partnership, and she nearly got away with it because most people don't look closely at something that appears functional from the outside. What I've learned, and what I hope Marcus carries forward, is that a real partnership doesn't require you to disappear into it. You can share a life with someone and still know where you end and they begin. You can love someone and still read the documents before you sign them. You can be loyal without being manageable. Marcus is rebuilding his practice now, and he calls me on Sundays. Last week he told me he'd taken on a client he'd turned down years ago, back when Serena had said it wasn't worth his time. He took the meeting, did the work, and came home to his own house with his own key and no one's permission needed. He told me it felt strange, good strange, like remembering a word you'd forgotten you knew. That's the thing about getting yourself back. It doesn't arrive all at once. It comes in moments, a client meeting, a Sunday call, a morning on the back porch when the lake is quiet, and you realize you've been sitting there for 20 minutes without waiting for anyone to tell you it was allowed.